Hello friends, good morning and welcome to this morning's sutta class. We will start with the Namo Tassa as usual. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome again. Today we are having the first session of our 4th session mini course where we explore how we can build our Dhamma practice skillfully. So we are going to explore different types of people and with different personalities, different mental qualities, and how you can find out which type of person you are and how you can use that to your advantage in your Dhamma practice. So thank you for joining in. As you can see, for the month of November, I will be on the channel twice a week, every Tuesday morning as usual. And then additionally also every Thursday morning because Ayya Soma and Bhante Sudasu are traveling. So they have asked different people to step in and help out. And I will be doing every Thursday morning as well. So as I just mentioned today, we will be talking about different types of people and how we can use that to our advantage in our Dhamma practice. So it's extremely helpful to know which type of person we are, because then we know our strengths and we also know our weaknesses. And when we know that, then we can rely on our strengths and use methods of meditation and study suttas and go to teachers that can teach people of our type. And of course, that will make our Dhamma practice much easier. It will go somewhat more smoothly, hopefully. And if we rely on our strengths, then the progress on the path will be a little bit faster. Whereas obviously, if we rely on our weaknesses, it will be a little bit more harder because we don't have the necessary prerequisites, the qualities in our mind. So it will be a little bit more difficult and it will be easier for people to get disheartened and to give up the practice. So it's quite useful to know which type we are. And of course, the Buddha has taught about many different types of people. And this month, we will be reading suttas that kind of explore this area a little bit. So today we will be reading from the Anguttara Nikaya 4.170. This is a sutta called In Conjunction, and it talks about 4 different kinds of people and 4 different ways to arahantship, so to the end of the Buddhist path. I have put a link in the live chat, so if you want to read along, please click on the link. The link is to Bhante Suchatu's translation, but I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So the sutta is called In Conjunction, and it goes as follows. On one occasion, the Venerable Ananda was dwelling at Kosambi in Gosita's park. There the Venerable Ananda addressed the bhikkhus, friends, bhikkhus. Friend, those bhikkhus replied. The Venerable Ananda said this. Friends, whatever bhikkhu or bhikkhuni has declared the attainment of arahantship in my presence has done so by these 4 paths or by a certain one among them. What for? So here we have a sutta that was given not by the Buddha, but by the Venerable Ananda. And of course, Venerable Ananda was the Buddha's attendant. So he was around the Buddha all the time for at least 25 years of the Buddha's teaching career. And because at the time of the Buddha, obviously, it was extremely popular among monks and nuns. If they attain arahantship, they would go to the Buddha and would declare the attainment in the presence of the Buddha. So Ananda, being the Buddha's attendant, he would have heard like hundreds or maybe thousands of testimonials of fully awakened monks and nuns. So we can assume that he was more than qualified to give a sutta or to give a teaching on this topic. And he heard all these testimonials of all these monks and nuns, and then he grouped them into 4 types. And now he's teaching about those 4 types. So the first type is as follows. Here, a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni develops insight preceded by serenity. As they are developing insight preceded by serenity, the path is generated. They pursue this path, develop it and cultivate it. As they are pursuing, developing and cultivating this path, the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. So here we have the first kind of person, and this is someone who develops serenity first and then insight. So serenity, samatha practices, tranquility, calmness practices first, and then the insight practices, so the Vipassana practices. And as they are doing this, the path is generated. That means they kind of make progress on the path, and over time, the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. So the mind becomes clearer and clearer, purer and purer, until finally they reach arahantship. We will talk a little bit more about this type in a few minutes, but let's go through the other types first before we go into more detail. So the second type is a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni who develops serenity preceded by insight. As they are developing serenity preceded by insight, the path is generated. They pursue this path, develop it and cultivate it. As they are pursuing, developing and cultivating this path, the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. So this is the exact opposite of the type that we have seen just now. So here we have somebody who develops insight practices, so the Vipassana practices first. And as they are doing this, at a later time, they also develop the Samata practices, the serenity or tranquility practices. And as they are developing Vipassana first, the same thing happens. And the path, they develop on the path. Then the fetters are abandoned, the underlying tendencies are uprooted, and eventually they reach arahantship. But they start kind of from the opposite end of the path. So they're walking kind of like a different path. There are 2 different paths towards the same goal. One starting from the serenity practices and the other one starting from the Vipassana practices. And then there is a third type. And here Ananda says, again, a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni develops serenity and insight in conjunction. As they are developing serenity and insight in conjunction, the path is generated. They pursue this path, develop it and cultivate it. As they are pursuing, developing and cultivating this path, the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. So here we have a type that is kind of in between the 2 types we have just seen. This is somebody who develops serenity and insight at the same time. And I think this also gives us the idea that people that these are not 2 very discrete paths, one just doing serenity, the other one just doing insight. But this is more like a spectrum. You could be very much towards one end and mainly focus on serenity, or very much to the other end, mainly focusing on Vipassana, or you could be somewhere in the middle where you develop both of them equally or somewhat equally. But these are not 3 very discrete points, but it's more like a spectrum where you could be anywhere on that spectrum, more towards the Vipassana side, more towards the Samatha side, or somewhere in between. And we'll talk about these 3 types in a little while, but let's explore the fourth type first, because this is a type that is a little bit different from the other 3. So here Ananda says, again, a bhikkhu's mind is seized by restlessness about the Dhamma. But there comes an occasion when their mind becomes internally steady, composed, unified, and concentrated. Then the path is generated in them. They pursue this path, develop it, and cultivate it. As they are pursuing, developing, and cultivating this path, the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. Whatever bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, friends, has declared the attainment of arahantship in my presence has done so by those 4 paths or by a certain one among them. So here we have a 4th type, and this seems to be a person who is kind of overwhelmed by defilements. So that person neither focuses on Vipassana nor on Samata practices. So it seems that their meditation isn't really going anywhere. They just have a lot of defilements, especially here we have mentioned restlessness, and especially restlessness about the Dhamma. So this is a person who is very much attracted to the Dhamma, has a deep faith in the Dhamma, but at the same time, the mind doesn't really calm down. And all this inspiration in the Dhamma and all this attraction to the Dhamma is causing a lot of mental hindrances to cloud the mind, and the mind is constantly restless and agitated. But eventually, for some reason or other, the mind calms down, and then they make a breakthrough, and then the path is generated and the fetters are uprooted. The fetters are abandoned and the tendencies are uprooted. So I have often heard other teachers discuss this sutta, and some of them have said they're not quite clear what this 4th kind is about, because usually we think of the Buddhist path as a gradual path. So sudden breakthroughs are kind of unusual, especially if your meditation isn't really going anywhere. And I have had teachers really telling me that we shouldn't think too much about this 4th type, because the 4th type is confusing and is not well understood. And most of the normal suttas give us the gradual path in a lot of detail. And this 4th type doesn't really seem to fit into this usual scheme of a gradual progress and a gradual path. But I think that we do have some testimonials of monks and nuns from the Buddha's time who did have this kind of type and who did have this kind of experience while they were practicing the Dhamma. So I want to spend a few minutes exploring this 4th type a little bit more, because it's a little bit obscure and it's not that well understood. And I think most of you know that we have collections of poems from the monks and nuns at the Buddha's time called the Tirigata, the poems of the monks, and the Tirigata, the poems of the nuns. And there we have a few hundred testimonials, and I think there are 2 in particular that seem to talk about a kind of path that is similar to what is described here. So I'd like to read those 2 poems. They're not very long, and explore a little bit what they are telling us about their progress on the path, just to understand this 4th type a little bit better. And so there's one nun and one monk who seem to have had these kind of experiences. And I think we'll do ladies first and talk about the nun first. So this is Tirigata 5.3 by a nun called Siha Bikuni. And I'll post the link in the chat if you want to read along. So this is Siha Bikuni. And her poem goes as follows. Due to improper attention, I was racked by desire for pleasures of the senses. I was restless in the past, lacking control over my mind. Overcome by corruptions, pursuing perceptions of the beautiful, I gained no peace of mind under the sway of lustful thoughts. Thin, pale, and wan, for 7 years I wandered, full of pain, finding no happiness by day or night. Taking a rope, I entered deep into the forest, thinking it's better that I hang myself, then I return to a lesser life. I made a strong noose and tied it to the branch of a tree, casting it round my neck. My mind was freed. So here obviously, we have a very dramatic and also very traumatic experience of this nun. Especially the end is quite extreme. So I'm totally not recommending this as a viable option of Dhamma practice to try and commit suicide. Not at all. I don't think that is you. If you feel that you're the fourth type still, you should not ever attempt these kind of things to enforce a breakthrough in the Dhamma. So content warning, don't do this. This is not recommended. But I think the experience is that she shares with us is valuable to look into in more detail. So what she says here is that she in the first verse, she says, she was restless in the past. She was lacking control over my mind. She was overcome by the corruptions, by the defilements, and she gained no peace of mind whatsoever. And so clearly her meditation wasn't working. She was not a Samata type. She also wasn't a Vipassana type. But still, I mean, she had a huge commitment to the Dhamma. So we can see that she did have this inspiration in the Dhamma. Basically, she gave up her entire life. She ordained as a Bikuni. She left everything behind. She left her family behind, her lay life, all the sense pleasures that she was craving this whole time, all these 7 years that she was wondering about. And even though her practice did not make any progress, still she had so much faith in the Dhamma that she stuck with it for 7 years without making any kind of progress. So we can see that she had all these hindrances in the mind, as it is described for the fourth type, but also she had this very strong attraction to the Dhamma. And she didn't give up easily. Like her attraction to the Dhamma, her faith in the Dhamma was so strong that she would rather commit suicide than go back to lay life. So we see that she did have this very strong connection to the Dhamma. And then obviously she put herself into this extreme situation basically she was on the verge of dying. She was on the verge of killing herself. And that's obviously a very extreme situation. So in that kind of situation, I think it's quite imaginable that the defilements would be somewhat suppressed and the mind would converge and become more concentrated at that point. And because the mind would be like being on the verge of death, would be more easily concentrated and would be somewhat single-minded, at that point, it was possible for her to make the breakthrough and break through to the Dhamma. And then, as the description of the fourth type is, the path is generated, and she was able to attain arahantship at that point. So we can see this is a very unusual case, and she had a very dramatic experience in the end, which enabled her to make that breakthrough. But it's not the usual case that we have in the Tirigata and Tirigata, and also that is described in the suttas, of a gradual progress where you get Dhamma teachings and you put them into practice and see how the mind develops, and eventually you make the breakthrough. But in her case, it's very much a lot of struggling and then one sudden breakthrough. And the second poem I wanted to share with you is a monk called Sappadasa. This is Tirigata 6.6, and his experiences are very similar to Siha Bikuni, and I'm going to share that as well in the live chat if you want to read along. So this is the monk Sappadasa, and his poem goes as follows. In the 25 years since I went forth, I have not found peace of mind, even as long as a finger snap. Since I couldn't get my mind unified, I was racked by desire for pleasures of the senses. Wailing with outstretched arms, I left my dwelling. Shall I? Or shall I slit my wrists? What's the point of living? For how on earth can one such as me die after resigning the training. Then I picked up a razor. I sat on a cot. The razor was ready to slice my vein. Then the realization came upon me. The danger became clear, and I was firmly disillusioned. Then my mind was freed. See the excellence of the teaching. I've attained the 3 knowledges and fulfilled the Buddha's instructions. So here we see it's a very, very similar case to Siha Bikuni. In Sapadasa Bhikkhu's case, he even struggled on for 25 years. He was ordained for 25 years, and he didn't find any kind of peace of mind even for a finger snap. So he was really, really suffering for 25 years. Again, we see that his mind was overcome by the hindrances. But again, we see his commitment to the Dhamma. He still kept on going for 25 years, even though the path didn't seem to be working for him. So we see his strong faith in the Dhamma and his strong attraction to the Dhamma. And again, he has the same kind of commitment that Siha Bhikuni had, where he thinks like there's no point in living and he doesn't want to die as a lay person, so he'd rather kill himself as a monk. And again, he was in this extreme situation, being on the verge of death. And then finally, being on the verge of death, his mind sort of converged, and he had an insight. He became strongly disillusioned, and then he made the breakthrough to arahantship. So again, it's a very, very similar case to Siha Bhikuni. And again, not a method that is recommended for ordinary people's practice. I think it's more likely to go wrong than to go right. But here, obviously, we have 2 cases where they were lucky and they did not die and they were able to make a breakthrough. So I think this kind of explains the 4th type a little bit more, those 2 testimonials from the nun and the monk. But most people will not be the 4th type. Most people will be one of the first 3 types. So we should explore the first three types a little bit more. So the first 3, just to summarize, is one who develops samatha first, then develops vipassana to attain arahantship. The second one is the one who develops vipassana first, then samatha, and then attains arahantship. And the 3rd type is one who develops both at the same time. And so what we see here is that the goal of arahantship is attainable from either end. If you're a samatha type, then you should recognize this and do practices that are more suitable for samatha meditation. Because if you rely on your strength, obviously your progress will be much faster. And then you should find a teacher who can teach you samatha practices. And if you are a samatha type and you use vipassana techniques, it will be a lot more difficult for you to make progress, because your mind doesn't naturally incline to that. So you'll be putting an obstacle in your path unnecessarily. And for the vipassana type, it's obviously the opposite. If you are a vipassana type, then you should rely on vipassana techniques and teachers who can teach that to you. So it's kind of quite important that we know which type we are, so that we can pick techniques skillfully, and that we can also pick our teachers skillfully, because not every teacher is teaching all of those techniques. And I think, and the sutta here tells us, it doesn't really matter which type you are. Both of these types lead to arahantship. But obviously the starting point is different, and so the path towards arahantship is somewhat different. And the way that this works is that if say, for example, you are a samatha type, eventually you will also be developing vipassana basically, like insight, wisdom, as a byproduct of your samatha practice. And the way that this works is that because if you are a samatha type, your mind will become concentrated fairly easily. So temporarily, the defilements are suppressed, your mind gets purer, your mind gets stiller, your mind gets calmer. And because your mind is so calm and pure and still, even though wisdom isn't your dominant faculty, your wisdom is maybe a little bit like significantly weaker probably than those of wisdom types, but because your mind is so still and clear, even with your weaker wisdom faculty, then you can make insights into well, the way karma works, the way rebirth works, the way dependent origination works, because your mind is so calm and pure that it's easy to see that it's no longer obstructed by the defilements. So wisdom arises as a byproduct of your strong samatha practice. And if you are a vipassana type, then samatha will arise as a byproduct of your strong vipassana practice, because as a vipassana practitioner, it would be somewhat easy for you to see, with the right techniques, to see how the mind works, how everything is interlinked, how the defilements obstruct you, how defilements arise and cease and in the mind, how dependent origination works. And because you can clearly see all these things, it's easy for you to, like comparatively more easy for you to abandon defilements. And so over time, as you abandon more and more defilements, the mind becomes clearer and purer. And since the mind becomes clearer and purer, it's much easier to also enter into samadhi states. So the samadhi, the calmness, the stillness of the mind is a byproduct of your wisdom practice. So it doesn't matter which type you are, both of these types lead you to arahantship, but it's important to know which of the types you are so you can skillfully build your own practice. And I think this dichotomy of the samatha types and the vipassana types is something that we also see in other teaching contexts, in other suttas. For example, we know that just before stream entry, there are people who are on the path to stream entry, and those are called the Dhamma Followers and the Faith Followers. And the Dhamma Followers are very similar to the wisdom types, and the Faith Followers are people who have a lot of faith, who have a lot of inspiration in the Dhamma. And for such people, it's usually, not always, but usually not that difficult to develop concentration and to develop samadhi practices. This is an area we are going to explore a little bit more in the next few sessions of our course. So I'm not going too much into detail. I just want to mention that there is a link here to other suttas and to those other types, the Dhamma Followers, the Faith Followers. And also these two paths go up all the way to arahantship, when we see that there are arahants who are liberated by wisdom, and there are arahants who are liberated both ways. And the arahants who are liberated by wisdom obviously have a dominant wisdom, vipassana faculty. And the arahants who are liberated both ways, these are arahants that have very, very strong samadhi, because they also attain the immaterial states. So not only the 4 jhanas, but also the higher immaterial attainments. And often they also have psychic powers, which obviously is a function of very deep and very profound samadhi. And the reason why I'm talking about this today and about how to find out which type you are, I think it's very, very important that people take responsibility for their own practice and that they themselves get to know themselves. And I think some of you will be familiar with some teachers that are maybe quite popular nowadays. And some of those teachers teach that their method is the only method that works, and their method, you should only practice their method. This is the quickest way. This is the best way. Don't experiment with any other kind of method. They discourage you from exploring, and they try to tell you that their method is the best one. And obviously, every single teacher that is out there, if they've made any progress on the path, they will also be one of these 4 types. And they have a method that works for them. And they are teaching the method that works for them. And if you are a type that is similar to that teacher, then obviously that will work very well for you. But if you're a type that is different from that teacher, that will not work for you. And if this is a teacher who cannot teach different methods and who doesn't acknowledge that there are different types of people who need different kinds of practices, then you could put an obstacle into your own path of practice if you blindly follow that teacher and just practice that method, believing that you shouldn't experiment with other methods and shouldn't listen to other teachers. And we have these kinds of teachers on both sides of the spectrum. We have teachers that teach only jhanas and only samadhi practices and say, this is the only thing you should do. And then we have teachers on the other side who teach only vipassana and say you should only do vipassana practices and not experiment with anything else. So yeah, I think it's very important that people take responsibility for their own path, get to know their own mind, and find their own path, and not blindly rely on other people, no matter how long they have been practicing or whether they're called teacher or not. But once you get to know, once you find out which your type is, then you can skillfully pick a teacher that can actually give teachings to your type of people. And I mean, there are also lots of teachers out there who can teach different methods to different kinds of people. So there are plenty of teachers out there who do recognize that different people need different kinds of techniques. So not all teachers teach exclusively one method. But if there are teachers out there who teach exclusively one method, then your alarm bells should go on, and you should be a little bit careful and investigate a little bit in more detail. And I have seen that there are quite a few questions in the live chat, so maybe I should slowly come to an end. But the last thing I wanted to mention is that this is something that probably you've heard from many other monastics already, but when you do your meditation practice, do not compare yourself to others. So sometimes people can very easily get discouraged when they hear other people and they make different experiences and you yourself don't make that kind of experience. So you think your practice is no good or isn't going anywhere, but it might be that they're just a very different type, and because they're a different type, their path is different and they will make different experiences. And it doesn't mean that you are less advanced on the path than them or more advanced or whatever. It really is not at all helpful to compare your experiences to others. If you have a good teacher, then that teacher tell your meditation experiences to that teacher, and that person will guide you. But yeah, it's actually not that helpful to compare meditation experiences with other people and try to determine who is more advanced or getting discouraged. And also, obviously, the other way around is the same thing. You compare your experiences to others, and they didn't make your experiences, so you think you are this amazing meditator and all the others are no good, and you your ego gets inflated because you think you have all these great insights, and the others don't understand anything. So again, that might be because they are on a different path, and this again is not a reason to inflate one's ego. Actually, this is obviously also counterproductive. So comparing yourself to others is always kind of a tricky thing, and we should be careful with that. And so to finish for today, I think it's very important to recognize that we are all individuals. All of us have different strengths, different weaknesses, different mental setups with different defilements, and also different good qualities that we can develop further. And for that reason, the path must be quite individual, and it's very important that we get to know ourselves, and that we also trust ourselves enough and trust our Dhamma practice enough that we are confident to walk our own path. Of course, while getting input from others, but also trusting ourselves, and also enjoying the path and enjoying that we are able to build our own practice to our own needs and to what we think is suitable for us. And with this, I will have a look at the questions in the live chat. if you have any further questions, please leave them there. And Buddha Ruchi says, he was not enlightened until after the parinibbana of the Buddha. I think this is referring to Ananda. This is probably referring to the beginning of the sutta, where I said that Ananda had heard all these testimonials from other people. Yeah, so Ananda was not enlightened until after the parinibbana of the Buddha. Some people say that is because he was so attached to the Buddha, and that attachment blocked his further progress. Still, the Buddha acknowledged that Ananda was a fantastic Dhamma teacher. So even though he was not an arahant, the Buddha very much encouraged him to give teachings. And also, it seems that this particular sutta here was spoken after the parinibbana of the Buddha, because of the beginning of the sutta, where normal sutta begins by telling us the location of the Buddha and then telling us the location of the speaker of the sutta, if the speaker is not the Buddha. But after the Buddha's parinibbana, the usual pattern is for the sutta only to tell us the location of the speaker. And since the Buddha is not mentioned here, that is an indication, not an absolute guarantee, but an indication that this sutta might have been spoken after the Buddha's passing away. So at this point, Ananda would have been an arahant. Yeah. Gita says, Aya, the Bikuni Siha is a famous sutta. I assume you mean that she has spoken a famous sutta? And I'm not sure if that is true. I don't know of any sutta that Siha has spoken. There are other bhikkhunis who have similar names. There's Soma, there is Sela, and those have suttas in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. I think Siha does not appear anywhere else in the canon except for the Tirigata. No, it doesn't appear anyone else in the early Buddhist part of the canon, except for the Tirigata. And Buddha Ruchi says, Aya, I noticed the restlessness of the fourth type is to realize the teaching. Can we say that restlessness is a longing or a grasping for the Dhamma? That puts a different spin on it. Yeah, I think that restlessness is very clearly connected to the Dhamma. So as I mentioned, the people who are the fourth type, these are not just ordinary people. I mean, in some way, they are still ordinary people because they are not stream enterers. But those are people who have a very, very strong connection with the Dhamma. We have seen in the case of the Bhikkhu and the Bhikkhuni, they have obviously chosen to ordain. So they must have had a strong commitment to the Dhamma. They have pursued and persevered for a long time, many, many years, even though they didn't make any progress. So clearly, they were trying to realize the Dhamma, but that kind of maybe they were trying too much, and that effort that they put in that didn't have a skillful results then caused a lot of restlessness to arise in the mind. So it was basically the striving to realize the Dhamma that was stirring up all these defilements. So I think this is something that maybe a lot of people experience in the beginning of the path, where we are very motivated to meditate, and we are very motivated to do various Dhamma practices, but somehow our mind constantly gets overwhelmed by various defilements. And of course, if defilements are in the mind, then there's a lot of restlessness in the mind. There's no stillness or calmness in the mind. So that restlessness that was mentioned as a description, a restlessness about the Dhamma, a restlessness obviously by necessity means that there are other defilements in the mind as well, such as longing and grasping and various kinds of desires to practice Dhamma, but probably also desires that were carried over from lay life. So if you're under the sway of desires, I mean, obviously that wouldn't only be desire for Dhamma, but also I think the bhikkhu also mentioned he had desires for sense pleasures. Yeah, he was racked by desire for pleasures of the senses. So yeah, but I think I mean, it's correct. I'm not quite sure what. Yeah, I'm not quite sure if I understood your question correctly. If I didn't, please type again in the live chat. But yeah, very clearly they had a very, very strong connection to the Dhamma, and that strong effort that they put in it would have also contributed a little bit to the restlessness that that was going on in their mind. And Melissa says, sounds like she was caught between two worlds. That can be trying, slipping back and forth. I do relate to number 4 and number 5. Anything is possible. Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by number 5, because we only have 4 types here in the sutta. I'm assuming you're talking about Bikuni Siha. And yeah, I think both Siha and Sapadasa were still feeling, because their practice wasn't going well, they were still feeling attraction to lay life. They were still feeling attraction to sensual pleasures. Siha said that she had lustful thoughts and that she had perceptions of the beautiful. So she was attracted to beautiful things, maybe. And Sapadasa also, as I just mentioned, he was overcome by desire for pleasures of the senses. And he was suffering from that so much that he was wailing loudly. So, yeah, I mean, we all know if you're not an arahant or not an anagami, then your mind is still quite unstable and can flip back and forth. And sometimes we're very inspired and want to practice Dhamma, and at other times our defilements are stronger and we are attracted to doing other things that are maybe a little bit less useful. So yeah, I think in some ways a lot of people probably can relate to the mind swinging back and forth between the two worlds, the Dhamma practice and the world of the sense pleasures. And Madalena asks, may I ask if the Buddha was both types, Samatha and Vipassana? So the Buddha obviously was a Sama Sambuddha, so he was a supreme teacher. And he said of himself that he knew all the paths that lead to arahantship. So whereas a normal arahant, depending on how much knowledge or how much wisdom he can develop on the path and how many experiences in the different meditation techniques he has, he would maybe know the path that he has walked on, and maybe a few other experiences that are similar to his path that he would also have experienced, or that he would seen other people go through. And if you have been a teacher for a long time, probably he would have seen his students struggling with different things and listening to other teachers teaching his students different things. So teachers might also be experienced in things that they haven't necessarily seen themselves, but they have heard other people talk about a lot. But the Buddha is unique in that he is a supreme teacher and he can teach all the paths, and he has a direct knowledge and overview over all the paths. So I think because the Buddha is a Sama Sambuddha, we shouldn't really classify him as one or other of those two types. His Samatha practice obviously was supreme, but his Vipassana, his wisdom knowledge also was supreme. So I think this is only a useful distinction for his disciples, but not for Sama Sambuddhas themselves. And Sam says, Sorry, I kind of lost. Oh, here. Yeah, is metta meditation samatha or vipassana? That depends on how you do it. Usually metta meditation is considered a samatha practice because you can use it to unify and still your mind. However, if you, for some people, if they do metta meditation, that can stir up a lot of negative emotions and it can be difficult for them. And in that way, you can also use metta practice to understand your mind better and to make some insights and develop some wisdom in how your mind works. And you can try to explore why it is that you get all this ill will when you're trying to do metta meditation, or why you get constantly distracted. And so technically, usually metta meditation is classified as samatha, but you can use it as a vipassana practice as well. The next question is from Sud, and they say, "Dear Venerable, thank you for your teaching. How can a lay Buddhist who's maybe working 12 to 14 hours per day practice while engaged in activity? It seems like all this takes a lot of time." Well, yes, that's why there is a Sangha of monastics. Well, just try your best, try to make time every day. Also it's always very important to get one's priorities right. So like the pursuit of money and wealth in this world is something that will only be beneficial to you in this very life. And once you pass away into the next life, you will lose everything that has to do with material possessions in this life. The only thing that you can carry over into the next life is the mental qualities that you have accumulated and the karma that you've made. So it's all a question of priorities. So if you have to work 12 to 14 hours, then, at least try to make some time for your Dhamma practice every day. And because that is the thing that in the long term is the more important thing. So that is, that should be our priority. That should be something that we can make time for in our lives, so that we ensure that this lifetime isn't a lifetime that is wasted on material pursuits. So if you work 12 to 14 hours per day, there's still 10 hours per day that you're not working. Obviously, you have to sleep. Obviously, you have to eat and do a few other things to maintain the body. But with the time that is left over, then you should decide for yourself how you spend that. And if Dhamma is a priority for you, then you should spend that on the Dhamma and not on other things that might also try to come into your life. So it seems that you have a few hours left still every day. So try to spend that on your Dhamma practice and don't spend that on other things. So Sam asks, Venerable, listen to a Dhamma talk while meditating. Is this considered third type or none of the above? Well, these different types is more about the character of people. It's not really about the activity it's not that 1 minute you do samatha meditation and then you are a samatha type. The next minute you're doing a vipassana meditation, then you suddenly become a vipassana type, and then you listen to a Dhamma talk and you become the third type. But actually, this type is a more stable feature of your character. And listening to a Dhamma talk, if that guides you into if you are a samadhi type and you listen to a Dhamma talk and that guides you into samadhi, then this is a suitable practice for you. And but you're still a samadhi type. You're still the first. Is it the first? Yeah, the first kind of type. And if you listen to a Dhamma talk while meditation and that helps you to develop wisdom, and you are a wisdom type, then that is a suitable practice for you. Or if you are the third type, then whether that Dhamma talk guides you into more wisdom or guides you into more samadhi, then that is a suitable practice. But listening to a Dhamma talk while meditating isn't necessarily connected to either of the three types. It might be beneficial depending on how you listen to the talk and how you use that in your meditation, or it might be entirely unbeneficial and it's just distracting, and in the end you didn't do any kind of meditation, you were just spacing out while randomly listen to some sound coming into your ears. So yeah, it really depends on how you use that talk. Gita says, we practiced Vipassana, then Samata. It was a very, very gradual path. Yeah, as I mentioned, this is the second type. If you are a Vipassana type, then doing Vipassana first is good for you. If you are not a Samata type, then doing Vipassana first is not the right approach for you. And if you are a Vipassana type, you don't actually have to do Samata. The Samata develops as a natural byproduct of your Vipassana practice, because as I mentioned, as you practice Vipassana, you make insights into how the defilements cloud your mind, how they are unbeneficial for you, and you can abandon them. And as you abandon them, the mind becomes clearer and purer, and Samatha naturally develops. And also the other way around, if you are a Samatha type, Vipassana is a natural byproduct of your Samatha practice. So you don't actually have to do the other kind of practice, the other that is the opposite of your type. The other kind of practice naturally comes if you pursue the type that is your strength, not the type that is your weakness. So yeah, I mean, doing Vipassana first is fine if you are that type, as I said, but you have to know yourself if that is the right approach for you. Melissa says, to be clear, a near-fatal accident humbled me greatly and very much helped perspective in my life. I returned to my roots. To be lay can be trying interacting with other lays at time. This is definitely having a close encounter with death. Death is really a very is a very intense experience, and that can really tell you how strong your Dhamma practice is, and whether your practice helps you through that experience, or whether you are still completely overwhelmed by defilements, and that means your practice is maybe a little bit weak still. So I had a very similar experience a few years ago, where I had a close call with death, and at that point I felt extremely lucky that I was ordained. And that I had given my life to Dhamma practice. So yeah, but yeah, it's a very, very intense experience, and like I personally also felt that it does make your mind fairly clear and pure, and you do see what the priorities are in your life, and it also helps you, if you pull through and survive, to focus on that more as you proceed with your life. And then when you say to be lay can be trying interacting with other lays at times, obviously to be a human being can be trying, because we have to interact with all the other human beings, whether they are lay or ordained. So ordaining with other monastics can also be trying at times, or as monastics or interacting with lay people can be trying, as lay people interacting with monastics can be trying. So yeah, clearly living in communities, having social contacts with other humans or any other kinds of beings can be trying, and this obviously is where we can see how strong our Dhamma practice is, how skillful we can navigate all these social pitfalls. And so just because people become monastics doesn't mean that their life is always peaceful and calm and there are no more social conflicts. But actually we can and should use those conflicts as fuel for our Dhamma practice and as tests to see if over time we are making progress. Gita says, the example of Siha Bikuni's experience is famous. I have also heard and read this story. That's what you meant. Yeah, that is true. Buddha Ruchi said he thinks that the question just now was how can Sud turn his 12 to 14 hours of work into practice. Well, that depends on your work. Many people try to incorporate mindfulness in their day-to-day activities. If you can have regular, like 5 minutes, 1 minute, 30-second breaks where you just return to your breath. Just try to focus on the moment. Just check in with your mind. See what's going on in your mind. Is there any defilement there? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling tense? Are you feeling fearful? Are you just feeling craving for the lunch break to get your food or to buy something or stuff? Also, is your work a skillful activity? Is it not something that harms others? So just regularly during the day, I try to check in with what is going on in your mind. Return to your breathing, even like just for 10, 20, 30 seconds, if you can. Try to do that regularly every half hour, every hour, depending on what kind of job you have, depending on what is possible for you. You can even set an alarm on your phone or on your computer to remind you regularly every 30 minutes, every 60 minutes to take a break, to return to your breathing, to do a small mindfulness exercise, and really check in during the day. What is your mind state? What kind of emotions are there in your mind? Are you just cultivating any unskillful thoughts? Are you just being angry, just fuming because your boss did something unskillful or your co-workers did something unskillful? Are you being frightened? Are you doing something unskillful in your work? Are you deceiving other people? Are you causing harm to the environment or to other beings? So just check in with your actions, your mental actions, your emotions, your thoughts, with your verbal actions, with your physical actions, and see if you can use that day to make good karma, good mental karma by thinking good thoughts, by having good emotions such as metta, goodwill, friendliness towards others, and obviously skillful verbal and physical actions. So having good relations with your co-workers, speaking in agreeable ways, hopefully having a job that in some way makes a positive contribution to the life of other people. So using the job to actually cultivate positive mental states and to make good karma in whatever small way you can during that day. Because as you mentioned, you spend half your life just doing that work, 12 hours or 14 hours every day. So we shouldn't think of this as a wasted opportunity, but use this to make good karma, because over time, even small acts of good karma will accumulate since you're doing them every single day for half of the entire day, 12 hours of every day. So just checking in with that, and it can be really helpful to set a small alarm on one's phone or computer just to remind you regularly that you should use the opportunity to be mindful and to make those positive contributions. And then let's see if there are any further questions. Aum says, the Plum Village app has a mindfulness bell. Which one can, I think, program for every few minutes? It brings me back to my mind, body, and speech. Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about just now. We can have apps like this. We can just set a small alarm. There are also apps for the laptop, for the computer. So just something that brings us back to the present moment. That's exactly what I was talking about just now. Yeah. So it's our hour of sutta study is over, and we have also come to the end of the questions for today. So next week we will explore a few other types of persons. So hopefully you can use this week to try to figure out whether you're a Vipassana type, a Samata type, somewhere in between, and check whether you're doing the right kinds of meditation techniques for that kind of practice. And next week, we will explore a few other types, and hopefully that will also be helpful to build your own individual meditation and Dhamma practice. For today, we will finish with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I will see you all either next Tuesday or next Thursday. Have a great day.